Hello, I'm Alison Purgiel with the Muskegon Area District Library. Thank you for joining us today for the final MADL RootTALK session of summer 2020, where we focus on family history research. Today's program is covering U.S. birth, marriage, and death records, also known as vital records. We'll start by looking at what vital records are. Then we're going to take a look at some 19th and 20th century sample records to learn what types of family history information are provided in them. And finally, we'll jump over to the internet, go online to review some tips on searching U.S. birth, marriage, and death records on two genealogy megasites, Ancestry Library Edition and MyHeritage Library Edition. I'm glad you could join us today. Let's get started. First of all, what are vital records exactly? A vital record is an original record that's created to record a life event at the time it occurs, and then that record is normally registered or filed with a governmental agency. As we mentioned in our first RootTALK of the summer, vital records are original records and are the gold standard for providing familial proof in doing genealogical research. Birth and death are obviously the two most important events in an individual's life. And marriage records are valuable because they often signify a union from which new lives may be created. When people unfamiliar with genealogy think about family history research, vital records are often the type of record they think people are always looking for. Birth, marriage, and death records are important gold standard original records for genealogical purposes, and the information provided can be invaluable in moving your family history research forward. Vital records can also be a challenging record group to search for as well, due to varying laws and practices about recording vital records and having access to them. Let's talk about accessibility. The practice of registering birth, marriages, and deaths evolved slowly in the U.S. Record keeping began at the local governmental level, village, townships, and cities. And then historically it moved up to the county level and finally to the state. Different regions of the United States vary when record keeping began. For example, the eastern seaboard states have records way earlier than the Midwest because, of course, that's where the early original population was. For example, Virginia enacted the first vital record registration law for births and deaths in 1632, although they were only collecting brief information. The state of Michigan legally started collecting birth and death records in 1867. But along with these official vital record groups for states, selections start from when they officially started recording. You also will see record groups for earlier dates for local communities, like I mentioned, those cities, townships, and villages. For example, Ancestry Library Edition has some Oakland County, Michigan vital records that go back as early as 1800 for the state of Michigan. So it can vary from state to state. Marriage record groups are also vary from state to state because marriage was seen as a religious sacrament, and then usually after the religious official had performed a marriage, it might then be registered with a local or county governmental entity. At the beginning of the 20th century, we start seeing standardization in vital record keeping. We start seeing the typical types of birth, marriage, and death certificates we would recognize today. The field of public health is responsible for that change. That field started being concerned about better health practices, the spread of disease, and the efficient use of resources to help prevent disease. So public health officials needed to standardize forms to ask for specific information in order to track the health issues better. One really interesting fact, it was a French statistician who organized and created the International List of Causes of Death back in 1893. This list is actually still used today, and it's now managed by the World Health Organization and is known as the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, or more commonly referred to as the ICD-10. In the U.S. today, there are national standards and complicated instructions as to what information is required, who can provide that information, and how a birth or death certificate should be completed. In the United States, the states have the authority and are responsible for the creation and collection of actual birth, marriage, and death certificates following these guidelines. And then the National Center for Health Statistics oversees the guidelines and the compiling of this information from all the states in the U.S. Some of those restrictions that you come across when looking at these important vital records. As you might imagine, with the detailed personal information that can be provided on a vital record, restrictions to access abound. To protect the rights of privacy of living persons, most modern records have restrictions on their use and access. These privacy laws vary from state to state. For example, in Michigan, death, marriage, divorce, and birth records over 100 years old are not restricted. For Michigan birth records newer than 100 years, individuals can request their own birth record or a birth record for their own child. But any other request for a birth record requires significant documentation. Death and marriage records, even if they're newer than 100 years in Michigan, are not restricted. In the state of Alabama, as a comparison, birth records are restricted for 125 years. Obviously, identity theft is a major reason for these restrictions, along with other privacy issues, but it will be something you come across again and again when you search birth, marriage, and death records. In nearly all states, the privacy interests of adoptive parents and adoptive children and birth families are protected by making all files related to the adoption process confidential and withheld from public access. To ensure that ongoing privacy needs are met, records of adoption court proceedings and the child's original birth certificate that show the birth parents are sealed after an adoption is finalized. Normally, a court order is almost always needed to get access to adoption records to see the original birth certificate. If it's an adoption record for someone who birth occurred 100 years ago, you might have a little bit easier time getting access to that record, but it may still require a court order. It just depends. Again, that varies. Due to the variety of restrictions in these record groups, you are more likely to see indexes for births and deaths on such sites as Ancestry Library Edition, instead of digitized images of the actual records certificates themselves. You will want to pay attention to where those indexes are from, because that's where the original records are more than likely held. And it may be a situation where you can go order a record online, or you may need to complete a form, provide some proof of ID, and mail a request for the record. And there may be a fee for it. So it's not going to be like the census that we looked at in last month's RootTALK, where every census, federal census, has been digitized and is available. It's really going to vary. And most of the time, you're going to see indexes as opposed to digitized records themselves. Now, let's get started on taking a look at specific vital records. And we're going to start with birth records. We'll start at the beginning. Looking at 19th century birth records, remember in these early years, it's primarily just going to be an entry in one of those huge, large ledger books. And here's an example of a 19th century set of birth records from the state of Michigan. And over here it says the county of Muskegon. And this is how the county clerk would record the information as it was reported to their office. Might have been reported by a physician if there was a physician handling the birth. It might be recorded by the family themselves coming in, and it's probably not going to be recorded actually when the birth occurred, because sometimes the county seat was far from where someone's residence might be in a county, and you might not record the birth of your newest child until the next time you made a trip into town. So it really varies. But let's take a look at the information that's provided. Over here in the first column, we have the record number. That means the record of birth that the county clerk is recording. Then we have the date of birth, the month, date, and year. We have the surname and a completed name if it's known. We have the sex of the child, and we have race. And then we have a couple of questions. Was it stillborn? And was it a multiple birth? Was it a twin or something like that? The birthplace of the child, the full name of each parent, the parent's residence, the birthplace of each parent, the occupation of the father, and then the date of the record. And that's the date that it was actually recorded. So if we take a look at the record on this first line, we see here record 120. The birth date for this child is March 5th, 1881. His name is William Vassar, so we have a full name. He's a male, he's white, doesn't look to be a multiple birth, and it was a live birth. He was born in Muskegon. The full name of each parent. His dad is Joseph Vassar. Mother looks like to be Clementine Murray. Residence is Muskegon for both of them, but their birthplace is Canada. Dad's a laborer. And the clerk recorded this information on May 2nd, 1882. So William was born in 1881, but the information isn't getting recorded until 1882. And all the information on this page. And what might have happened is the clerk might save up records reported like maybe quarterly or something, and then go in and record it, but they would keep track of when they actually did it with the top date there. So what kind of information does this help us with? Well, first of all, here we have an original birth record for William Vassar. So if he is somebody in our family we're searching for, this is the gold standard. This is going to be his birth record. There isn't going to be a birth certificate like we think of today because of the time frame of when his birth occurred. So we know we have great information about William here, but what else do we get? Well, we get his father's name and his mother's name, including her maiden name of Murray. So now we have a whole other branch of the family, the Murray family, to search for. And we know they're born in Muskegon, as is William. I mean, they reside in Muskegon, excuse me, as is William, was born there. But we know that the parents were born in Canada. So we have their names. If we wanted to search for Canadian birth records, now we know that's where we need to start, that we don't need to look in Muskegon County for birth records for these two individuals. So that saves us time and gives us another clue. So very helpful information in these early birth records, even though they are very brief and don't give us the type of information that we think of in a current record today. So that's an example of a 19th century record. Now let's take a look at a 20th century record sample. And this is a little bit more what like we're familiar with seeing today. And remember, we talked about that the standardized form came along as a direct result of the public health field requiring certain information to be asked. And let's take a look at this sample record. And this is kind of fun here. I picked a record and see if you know who this person is, but we'll start at the top. Place of birth, we have the County of Grant, the Township of Center, the Town of Marion, and they're in the state of Indiana. This is the state line here. And we have an address for the baby. And then we have the full name of the child, James Byron Dean. And actually, this is the birth certificate for 1950s movie star, James Dean. Kind of fun to take a look at it. We get the sex of the child, was it a single birth or a twin birth? If plural, number and order, like if was he the first twin or the second twin, that would be recorded if that was asked. Legitimate, yes, back in the day, they did ask if a baby was legitimate, meaning the parents were legally married. And we have his birth date, February 8th, 1931. So obviously, in the state of Indiana, we have some access to birth records that are not 100 years old yet. So there's a state difference right there. Remember, in Michigan, we don't have access to looking at 1931 birth records. We get information about the parents here, full name of the dad, Winton Dean, same address, race, he was 24, born in Indiana, and he's a dental technician. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have the mom's information, including a maiden name, Mildred Wilson, same address, race, 20 years old, born in Indiana, and she's a housewife. And then down at the bottom, we have number of children born to this mother, including the present birth, 1. One of the children now living with this mother, including the present birth, 1. And were precautions taken against a specific eye issue? And yes, it was. And here's your public health question, one of them right here, asking about that. And this information here about the birth order and number of children means James Dean was their first child. And then the doctor's information down here, or the midwife, was where they put their documentation, and they certify that they attended the birth. So this is, like I said, a certificate like we're used to looking at today, perhaps for our own children. But there is great information here. We get the full name of the parents, including mother's maiden name. We get their birthplace in Indiana for both of them, and we have their ages. So with that, we can extrapolate back, let's see, 1931. So if mom was born 20 years ago, we can look for a birth record in Indiana for 1911. And dad, looks like maybe 1907 and also in Indiana. So it gives us further places to keep looking for original records for the parents. So lots of good information in these birth records here as well in this time frame. So that's what birth records will look like, either in the ledger form or a certificate form. And you can see all the great information we can get from them to further our family history search. Now we're going to take a look at marriage records. Marriage records often remain in the county of origin. They're not always collected by the state. It just, again, varies by state to state in the U.S. Again, this is going to be a record group where you're going to find a lot of indexes on genealogy sites, but maybe not the digitized records themselves. And here is a look at a 19th century marriage record from the state of Michigan. We have up here to the Honorable Secretary of State of Michigan, return of marriages in the county of Wayne in the quarter ending June 30th, 1888. So we have the information here of what the time frame is. And then again, we have the record number here. So the number of the record as the clerk's recording it. Then it's going to ask for the date of the license because they got a license, and this is the application. This is the information going in for it. The full name of the two individuals getting married, their age, and their race, and their residence, and their birthplace, and their occupation, and then the name of the father and mother for each person, and the date of, if they were previously married or not, the people getting married, the date of the marriage, the place of the marriage, and then the name of the officiant who actually handled the marriage, and then the witnesses. And I chose this particular record because it's kind of fun down here. If you remember in our RootTALK session from July, we looked at the census records for Henry Ford and his wife Clara. I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the marriage record for the two of them. And they're down here, their record number 1173. Their license was applied for on April 4th, 1898, it looks like. And, excuse me, 1888, my apologies, 1888. And the groom's name is Henry Ford. The bride's name is Clara Bryant. They're 25 and 22, their race, where they were living, where they were born in Michigan, the occupation, and I love this, Henry Ford back in 1888 when he got married was a farmer. Wasn't quite yet the automotive manufacturer he becomes later. His father's William Ford. Clara's father is Melville Bryant. His mother is Mary. I think it's Literate. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right. And then Clara's mother is Martha Bush, it looks like. Neither one of them had been married before, Henry or Clara. The actual wedding date was April 11th, 1888. The location was Greenfield, Michigan. And we have the name of the rector, and then the witnesses. Looks like it was Henry's father and Clara's mother were the witnesses. So, wow, great information here on this 19th century marriage record. We have the ages of the bride and groom and the location of their birth. So now we can extrapolate back, subtract the years, and figure out what time frame you might look for some birth records and in what state we would look for them. We have parents' names, including maiden names for the mothers. So if we hadn't known that before, there's a whole nother family branch to start looking for. So all types of good information there provided in this marriage record. If you look at the record down below, it's kind of interesting. The record 1174 appears to be crossed out, and they applied on April 4th, 1888, the same day what the license was applied for. But over here for the date of the marriage, it says marriage not performed, and the record is crossed out. So if this happened to be information that you were looking for a family member, looks like there's two names for the bride, Reddy George or Reddy Cole. If this was information you were looking for, this would be a kind of interesting family story. Well, they were going to get married, but something happened. Maybe they get married later, maybe something happens, but this license didn't work out for them. So fascinating what you can see in these ledger books. Again, not as marriage certificate like we might think of today, like we might have ourselves, but it gives you a sense of the type of information that's provided for in these 19th century records. Let's look at a 20th century sample. And here we have a marriage record with the license and the certificate on the same document. And this is a marriage record from Muskegon County, Michigan. And it's telling us that Mr. Edward Stanton and Miss Marion Haynes filed affidavits in the office to say that they are going to get married. Mr. Stanton is 28, lives in Muskegon Heights. Birthplace was Washington. His occupation is a lathe operator. And father's name was Brian Stanton, and mother's maiden name was Viola Ross. And then we have for the bride, her name is Marion Haynes. She was born in Muskegon. She lives in Muskegon. She was born in Michigan. She's a machine operator. Her father was George Haynes, and her mother is Isa Lockwood. And she has not been previously married. Looks like Mr. Stanton was previously married one time before. And then the county clerk witnesses that this information is sworn to be true. And then down here is the certificate of marriage where Mr. Stanton and Miss Haynes got married in Ludington on August 7th, 1943. And two witnesses by the last name of Runkle. And if we look at this, the officiant of the wedding itself was Reverend Runkle. So some great information we can kind of pull from here. First of all, we have, again, mother's maiden names, locations of birth for the bride and groom and their ages, so we can extrapolate back to look for birth records. We have mother's maiden name, so a whole other family to search for. Down here, it's kind of interesting. The Runkle witnesses are more than likely probably relatives of the Reverend Runkle, And it may be that this marriage was done quickly in the church, just with the two and bride and groom, and maybe no other family members attended. And looking at the time frame of 1943, it may be that they got married in a hurry because maybe Mr. Stanton had been drafted and was called up to go fight in World War II. You just don't know. But it is interesting to see that the witnesses aren't family members of the bride and groom, but appear to be related to the reverend who handled the wedding. So kind of interesting to take a look at that. And also, they live in Muskegon County, but they got married in Ludington, Michigan. But the wedding license is filed in Muskegon County. License and certificate usually get filed in the county where you took out the license, but not necessarily at all where the wedding took place, particularly for destination weddings, but also for, lots of people live in a county but might have gotten married in another county at even just a venue in your own community, but it might be another county. So it's always interesting to see. License and certificate are almost always filed in the county where the license was applied for. So that's something helpful to keep in mind. Now let's take a look at that last record, vital record in our lives, death records. One interesting thing about death records is they're almost always open to you. Once you're dead, you really don't have much privacy anymore. And you can't do much with a death record because nobody's going to let you, as we mentioned before, no one's going to let you open up a credit card or do something like that with a death record. That doesn't help you in that situation. Again, we're going to get the early years of the ledgers, and later years we're going to start seeing a standardized certificate. You're definitely going to see some unusual historical medical terms on death records. It's useful sometimes to look up a definition for that historical medical term so you can understand what the cause of death was. Could have some interesting impacts on your own family and your family's medical health history. If you remember back in our June Root Talk, we talked about Cindy's List, the internet website that's kind of like a catalog for all the genealogy websites on the web. If you go on Cindy's List and type in medical terms, you'll get a whole list of sites that will give you definitions. One that I like to use on a regular basis is the one that McMaster University out of Canada puts up. They have one called Antique and Obscure Words in the History of Health and Medicine. And that's a nice dictionary style where all the terms are arranged alphabetically, and you can go through and look and determine what it is, what unusual disease your ancestor might have passed away from. Because the term that's written on the certificate, you may not recognize. Now let's take a look at a 19th century record. Again, once more, we're looking at that ledger style. We haven't moved into the certificate format yet. And this record is, again, from the Honorable Secretary of State of Michigan. It's the return of deaths in the county of Muskegon for the year ending December 31st, 1878. And we get the record number, the date of death, the full name of the deceased, again, their race, their sex, what their marital status was, their age in terms of years, months, and days, the place of death, the cause of death, the birthplace of the deceased, their occupation, and it does ask for parents' names, and then the date of when the record was recorded. So that's kind of helpful. And I pulled this record out because it happens to be for an interesting gentleman. Here we have record numbers for the order of the court of the clerk putting them into the record book. And this is record number 1818. And the date of death for this person is April 30th, 1878, it looks like. And it's Jonathan Walker is the name. Does anybody recognize that name in Muskegon County? If you're a local history buff, you will know that Jonathan Walker is the man with the branded hand. He was a sea captain who was an ardent abolitionist and helped many slaves try to escape via water routes. And he got caught at one time. He became ill and his crew got lost and they got taken into custody. And Jonathan Walker was found guilty of slave stealing, which is what it was referred to when you were trying to help slaves escape. And his hand was branded with the letters SS. And he ended up his life living in Michigan and living in Muskegon County. And there's actually a nice little memorial to him in the old cemetery downtown Muskegon by the post office. But this is his death record. So we have that date of death, April 30th, 1878, Jonathan Walker. He is a male. He's white. He was married. His year was 79. His age was 79 years, 1 month, 8 days. He died in Norton Township, and he died of consumption. He was born in Massachusetts. His occupation was a sea captain, And his parents' names are unknown by the person who provided the information, but their birthplace is Massachusetts, same as Jonathan. And then the record was recorded in May 22nd, 1879. So just like I was saying before, the county clerk might save up these reports of deaths as they came in and then recorded them when they had a moment to do that. And so what do we get from this for Jonathan Walker? Well, we can do 79 years, 1 month and 8 days, and this is 1878, so we can maybe go back to 1799 or something looking for a birth record for him, and says he's born in Massachusetts, so that would be where we could start looking for it. And unfortunately, we don't have names here for his parents, but if we found his birth record, maybe something might be recorded there as well. And interesting to learn that he died of consumption, and consumption is the historical medical term for what we think of today as tuberculosis. So that's one of those, how those helpful medical dictionaries come into play. So lots of great information here to help us go forward if Jonathan Walker had happened to be a family member that we were researching. So now we'll take a look at the Ancestry sample. Here is a death record for actually someone in my family. This person happens to be my husband's great-great-grandfather. So let's take a look at this record. Again, now we're into the standardized death certificate that came into play in the early 20th century, in the early 1900s, thanks to a push from the public health field. We get the county is Manistee, the local community is the city of Manistee, the full name of the deceased is Alison Purgiel. We get the address of where they were living, 701 Ramsdale Street, and we get the length of residence in the city or town where the death occurred, 45 years. Over here, we found that he's a male, he was white, he was married. The name of his spouse was Apollonia Purgiel. We have a date of birth of what I think is February 13th, 1840. It could be December. I'd have to check my family records to be sure, but I think it's February, but I could be wrong about that. I think it's February 13th, 1840, and he's 78 years, 8 months, and 1 day old. He's a laborer, and he worked at B&D Lumber Company. His birthplace was Poland, and we have the name of his father, John Purgiel, also born in Poland, and mother's maiden name was Mary Papola, born in Poland. And the informant is Frank Purgiel, living at 622 Davis Street, and I happen to know that Frank Purgiel is Valentine's son. He's my husband's great-grandfather. And over here, the date of death was October 14th, 1918. And it says there was a coroner jury's verdict. Now, this means that there was some type of coroner's inquest for Valentine's death. And it probably means that maybe he either was suddenly found dead at home in his sleep or something, or that he passed away. He might have had something happen at work. And since it says valvular disease of the heart disease, he probably maybe had a heart attack at work or something like that. And then we get the coroner's signature because no doctor was attending him. In these records, if there's a doctor who, like, they have been sick for a period of time or something, the doctor would be noting the time here and the doctor's name would be here. Then we get where he's buried at Martin Carmel Cemetery on the date of October 16th, and the funeral home or the undertaker was Mike Janicki in Manistee. So lots of great information on here, really good information in these 20th century death records. They are the good record source, really. I mean, the best one out of the bunch in terms of good information, because up here where they ask length of residence in the city or town where death occurred, 45 years. And then how long in the US is asked over here. That wasn't filled in for Valentine because it's probably the same amount of time. So that tells me if I want to look for some immigration records, maybe some naturalization records for Valentine, I need to go back about 45 years and take a look in that time frame. And then if I want to look for birth records, I have a birth date for him in Poland somewhere. Now, the tricky thing about Poland, as those of you who have some sense of world history, is in the 1840s and 19th century for Poland was under different ruling of Germany or Russia or Austria, depending on what area of Poland, what region of Poland you might have been residing in. So it can be a little challenging to determine that, but Polish records are where I'm going to be looking for a birth record for Valentine. And then I have a mother's maiden name, so I can go from there too, further back in Poland. So that's really, really helpful information. and can really help me forward my search. And also I have a cemetery location. I could go visit the grave if I wanted to. So it's really helpful information. Now, the one caveat that I want to provide for looking at death records, and it really doesn't matter, but it's really something to keep in mind, especially for 20th century records where a lot of more detailed information is provided. The personal information about the deceased is usually provided by a family member. And then the medical certificate of death is filled out by the authorized official to do that, either the physician or in this case, the coroner, whatever the situation might be. So the person giving the information on the personal information, what you want to remember is they've just experienced a death in their family. They're giving information about a loved one. Like I know, for example, that Valentine is Frank's father. So Frank's giving this information about the death of his father. And it could be right, but if you do, as you go on in your research and it turns out that Papilla isn't actually her maiden name, or it's something slightly different or whatever, or the year of birth isn't right or something like that, it's totally understandable because they are providing this information and they either are feeling some stress because they've lost a family member, or it's a more removed family member than someone from the immediate family and they're not 100% accurate just because they don't know exactly. So it's always important to remember that the personal information can sometimes be slightly incorrect depending on who the informant was and what shape they're in, because they've just had a loss in their family. So good to keep that in mind. Now, we've taken a look at vital records, the way they look generally in the 19th and 20th centuries. So now we're going to do some actual searching online for vital records. As usual, our two favorite genealogy megasites are Ancestry Library Edition and MyHeritage. They're the good starting points for looking for birth, marriage, and death records. Remember, more general information about accessing these two sites and how to get to them from home was covered in the June 2020 RootTALK session. And you can view that session on MADL's YouTube channel. So let's get started by going to Ancestry Library Edition. Okay, here we are on Ancestry Library Edition's homepage, and we're going to take a look at a couple different ways to search birth, marriage, and death records on this genealogy megasite. So if we go back up here to the menu bar here at the top of the homepage and click on the search button, a couple of options come down. You could search all the categories of records they have, which is what this button here does for you. And I highly do not recommend that because you're going to get a lot of results, particularly if you have a common name. I really recommend looking in a specific record group so that you can remember what type of record it is that you're looking at. And then they're broken out here: census and voter lists, birth, marriage, and death, military, immigration, travel. Birth, marriage, and death. That's what we're interested in. So let's click on that. And when we choose that category, what comes up then is a nice search template where we can search by name and all of the birth, marriage, and death records that Ancestry holds. And believe me, it's a huge, huge number. So we can narrow by category, and Ancestry sort of prompts you with that choice right here at the top. We can search by births, we can search by marriage and divorce, or by deaths. And if we pick one of those categories, let's take a look at the births category, then what it's going to do is bring up another search page for you that's just going to search all the birth records they have now. So it's going to search everything they have, not just one state or anything, but everything they have. So that's certainly an option, and you can do that. But let's go back to the home page for a second. We can always do that by clicking on the Ancestry Library icon up there. And let's pull down the search menu again, and let's try looking at the card catalog. The card catalog is a nice, quick way where you can narrow down for a specific record group that you want to look for. And I highly recommend doing a keyword search as opposed to a title search, because for the title search, they want the exact title, and sometimes you might not get it exactly right. So I start with a keyword search, and let's take a look at Michigan death records, for example. So I'm going to type in Michigan death and hit the search button. And now it comes up, there's 122 record groups that Ancestry says it has that have some type of Michigan death record in them. So now we're going to scroll down and look at, they look promising here. Looks like there's some church records for death, and there's some county records here. Oh, here's some marriage records that look interesting that probably have some type of mention of death in there somehow. And oh, look, here's Michigan death records, 1867 to 1952. That's a pretty extensive time frame. I'm going to choose that record group. And I'm going to take a look again for my great-great-grandfather-in-law, Alison Purgiel. I'm going to type Valentine in there, Purgiel, and I know that his death occurred in Manistee, so I'm going to fill that in. And remember, Ancestry has that nice autofill for you, but only use it if you're 100% sure that you're in the right county, or if you know. If you don't know, just type in the location and leave it that way. You don't have to choose the autofill, but I'm going to do that and hit the search button. And we'll wait for the results, and up comes, oh, one record, but it's an exact record it looks like. It's Valentine Purgiel with that death date of 1918, and they're reading that birth date is December, and that may be correct. So let's view this record. And up comes a nice transcription of the information on the record with parents' names and everything. But look, there's the gold standard itself, the original record. I can take a look at that as well. So I'm going to click on that. And up comes the certificate for Valentine Purgiel, the same one we looked at a few minutes earlier in the program. So if I want to keep this record, I have some options right over here. And those options are, I can click on the tool, the cross tools here for my tool options, and I can print it. If I have a printer at home or if I'm at the library, I can print there. I can download the record and save it to a flash drive or my computer or whatever. So that's my option there. I save it as a JPEG file, a picture file. So that's an option. You can go up to the save button up here. This is a little bit of a shortcut. I can save to this computer again. It's the same as the download option there, but I can also send the image home. And that's where the option comes up really quickly to put in your email address, enter it again to make sure you didn't have any typos, and send the email, and a link to this record will be sent to your email. So just a nice couple of options there, quick and easy to get records from Ancestry. I really highly recommend Ancestry for US birth records. They have a huge collection, quite extensive and very complete, and if they can get digitized images, they certainly do their best to do that. So that's really quite helpful. And that's the nice, quick and easy way to search for vital records on Ancestry. Remember, go up to the menu bar, pull down the search tab, and look at the record groups this way, or go into the catalog to look for maybe a more individualized state collection or something. Now let's move over to the next genealogy site. So here we are on the MyHeritage Library Edition homepage. And unlike Ancestry, there's no menu bar or anything, but they do provide you with a search template. And if we searched in this box here for a birth, marriage, or death record, we'd be searching all of the birth, marriage, and death records that MyHeritage held. And again, don't recommend that because you're going to get a lot of matches, particularly if you have a common surname. So it's best to work with a specific record group so you remember what it is you're looking for. So over here on the side are the options where we see the categories of records. As we scroll down, we see there's census and voter lists, there's family trees, there's birth, marriages, and deaths, photos, military, but aha, birth, marriages, and deaths. There we are. So let's click on that. And then up comes a search screen for this collection. We get a little bit of a description here of what they have. But again, you're going to be searching a huge collection of records because it's all they have for birth, marriage, and death. Over here on the side, they do have it separated out here a little bit: birth records, marriage and divorce, death, burial, cemetery. So we can be more specific that way. So let's, for example, click on marriage and divorce, and now we will only be searching the marriage records that they have and the divorce records. And over here on the right-hand side, what MyHeritage offers to you is a listing of all the records they have, but it's not everything. You always need to click on the Show All button. And then when you choose that selection, what you're going to get is a listing of everything that MyHeritage Library Edition has. And so now over here, the page is back up again, and we can scroll down and see all the different record groups that they have. They marked some record groups that are new, so that's kind of nice to help you if you use the site often. Those little new buttons will mean something to you, be helpful to you. So that's still a huge bunch of records to search, and then you can put in your information here. But again, you're searching a pretty big collection. So what I like to do is go back to the home page and click on the MyHeritage Library Edition icon. We're back on that home page, and over here at the top of the categories, there's an option for Browse Collection Catalog. And this is a place where you can put in and search for a specific record group that you might be interested in. You see they have all the record groups laid out here that you can take a look at, but you can also put in a search term as well. And let's take a look at, I don't know, let's get Kentucky deaths for a second here. So we'll do Kentucky death, hit the search icon there, and they do actually have a collection, only one it turns out, but it covers a big time frame, 1900 and 1999, and about 2.6 million records. So I'm going to click on this, and it takes you to a home page where you're just going to be searching now in Kentucky deaths. We're not looking at everything they have for deaths, just Kentucky, just the state of Kentucky deaths. And I'm going to get a nice description here. That pull-down menu gives you a little bit more information. And if you notice, it talks about this is an index. So this is an index. So we may not see actual records here. It may just be an index, but it might give me information about an actual record. So let's see, if I take a look for, say, my great-grandmother, let's try that. I know her first name is Sarah. I know that her last name was Durbin. And I know that she died in Fayette County in Kentucky, which is where the city of Lexington, Kentucky is located. So that's all I'm going to put in and see if I get any kind of result. I'm going to hit the search button. And I get some links here, several different Sarah Durbins throughout the state here. But the first one, because just like Ancestry Library Edition, MyHeritage Library Edition ranks your searches with the best one first, says the date of death is September 10th, 1951 in Fayette County, Kentucky. And I happen to know that's the right year for my great-grandmother's death. So I'm going to click on this record choice because this looks promising to me. I get an approximate date of birth for Sarah. I get a residence in Fayette County, Kentucky. I get a date of death in Fayette County, Kentucky. I get a certificate number, a state volume number, and an officer number. But I don't get any link to an image or anything else. So this is a situation you're going to often come across when you're looking at vital records. It's not going to always be like Ancestry Library Edition example that we just looked at, where we got to see the actual death certificate itself that had been digitized. It's a situation where now I have a death date, I have an index listing, I have a certificate number for the state of Kentucky, all very helpful information, but not the gold standard, not the original record. But with the certificate number and this date of death, and I would also make a note of these state volumes and officer volumes, I would maybe do a search online for the state of Kentucky death records and see where I might go to request one, if I can request one online or if I have to do a written request or whatever the requirements might be. And it might end up even maybe costing me some money, but you just never know. So that's the type of index listing you often see for a vital record. So let's go back to the MyHeritage Library Edition homepage. So again, you can narrow it down under the birth, marriage, and death heading here for the specific types of records and do searches in them, or you can choose the Browse Collection Catalog option up here at the top of the category column and do a search for a specific state, Michigan, Indiana, California, and then birth, death, or marriage, and see what kind of record groups come up. I will tell you for MyHeritage Library Edition that I would really recommend them more for European record collections. They really are getting quite a bit of European records. I think that's really where their strong suit is. And so they're not going to carry a lot of US records, and it's just something to keep in mind, and especially digitized records, but they'll have some indexing, but European records are a stronger suit for them. So it's just something to play the two different genealogy websites off of. Well, now that's a wrap for the final summer 2020 session of MADL RootTALK. We hope you enjoyed the U.S. birth, marriage, and death records presentation today. Don't forget to like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel to access all of our virtual programming. A quick way to get to MADL's YouTube channel is to go to our website at madl.org and then click on the YouTube icon up in the right-hand corner. I have an arrow here on the page, and here I'll hover by it too. This little sideways triangle, this is the logo for YouTube. If you click on that, it'll take you right to MADL's YouTube channel. The Muskegon Area District Library serves the community with 10 local branches, and we're open 24/7 with access to many digital resources. Please visit madl.org for more information.